Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
So glad to have you on the show today. First of all, I'm excited to hear about your journey without alcohol. And then you've got a journey even behind that, moving into Mexico and founding a phenomenal product that I'm excited to hear a little bit more about it. I'm excited for the listeners to hear about it if it's their first time as well, because I don't do a lot of talking about products on this show, but it fits so well into what your story is. And it's a product that I find incredibly fascinating because I feel like it encompasses a lot that other brands that I maybe see on shelves doesn't have, which has got somebody behind the product, which is you. It has a phenomenal story and it has a place that can be visited and a process that you can kind of like shine a little bit of light onto. So it drinks well and it's made well, and I'm excited to hear about that and more. And thank you for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share.
Let's jump back into a little bit of your history with hospitality. How did you come to join the industry? And I think more importantly, how did you stay in it for a while? It's one thing that to start a job within hospitality industry. It's another one to kind of like stay there for a bit.
Mhm. Yeah. This will date me a little bit, but as soon as I turned 21, I moved to New York City. I'm originally from Toronto, and I wanted to be like Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City. I wanted to work in a magazine, and I needed to figure out a way to make an income while doing free internships at a large magazine company. So I ended up working my first job at Webster Hall in Union Square in New York City. And I remember the interview I went to, I found it on Craigslist, and the manager was like, "So, can you name 5 whiskeys?" And at this point, I just turned 21. I barely knew anything about drinks. All I knew was a gin and tonic at this time. I didn't know about brands. I didn't know anything. I just wanted to work. And I said, "I have no idea. I don't even know what a whiskey is, but I'm eager to learn. I'm friendly, all of that." And he was like, "Okay, come on. Like, name one vodka brand." And same answer. I didn't know what vodka was compared to what was whiskey. I had no idea. And and I thought I totally bombed that interview. I left. I was kind of like, okay, I'm not sure what's going to happen. A few hours later, he called me and he was like, "Do you want to start tonight?" So that was my intro into the hospitality scene. And I remember a few weeks into working there, I was working literally just at nights from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., like the worst time to be working. And then I was also doing my internships at 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it was kind of like 12 hour opposites. And I remember I was at this bar. Webster Hall has multiple bars and multiple floors. And this woman came over to me and she wanted a green martini, a green apple martini. And I had no idea what that was. So I said, "Well, what's in it?" And she's like, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, if you don't know, how am I going to make it?" And I didn't mean to be catty at all about that. I literally just didn't know what goes in this green apple martini. And she looked at me shocked, like, "How dare you ask me what's in it?" And I said, "Well, how can I make it if you don't also know what's in it?" And that kind of began my fame as a bitchy bartender. I didn't actually mean to be that way. It was more just I was just very straight up and forward with what I needed to do in order to get your drink done. And that was my introduction to hospitality, and slowly learned how to smoothen things out from there. Ended up continuing working in hospitality, more in cocktail bars in Toronto, and ended up opening up my own line of salts and sugars, mainly to honestly to get free tequila. Tequila was my favorite um, spirit of choice, and I thought, well, what's a great way to work with tequila companies? Let's make an accessory to that. So I started a salt company, made different flavors of salts, and I was that little salt bottle that came along with the bottles at the liquor stores, and that went really great until COVID happened. I think that's what happened for all hospitality. I was fired from all of the bars I was working at. I worked at a lunch bar, I worked at a dinner bar, and I worked at a club. So all 3 of those places had to shut down. I had bachelorette parties, private parties that were all booked that I had to return, and I didn't know what to do. I was kind of at minus since I had to refund all of those deposits, and I didn't know what to do next. I ended up following the trend of freely Instagram lives, and I started teaching online cocktail classes, and those I offered for free. And then I ended up selling cocktail kits that ended up being branded by many different alcohol companies, and it was doing really, really well. but I found myself in a very dark space. I was sitting in front of a screen by myself in my own little apartment, and other people were sitting in their little places in their little apartments all by themselves drinking multiple drinks and just pretending to be normal, pretending to be socializing when there was just looming darkness above you know, above everybody. And I thought, well, I don't want to continue this. I don't want to condone and uh make this more accessible, more normal for us to all just be drinking alone in our condos. And that just kind of was the breaking point for me, where socializing and drinking and the bar scene just no longer was fun for me anymore. And I think it just gave me a pause. I wasn't in a space where like I needed to stop drinking, but it did give me a moment to start thinking, wait a minute, am I even having real connections if I'm now seeing what a lack of connection I'm having online? And the cocktail kits, the cocktail classes were doing really well, and again, I just didn't feel happy collecting all of this money. All the marketing dollars of these alcohol companies were coming to me because they wanted digital presence, they wanted people teaching cocktail classes, they wanted exclusive in these cocktail kits. It was doing really well, but I just didn't feel happy, I didn't feel satisfied, didn't feel fulfilled. So I did a crazy thing. My parents are still yelling at me about it, saying, "You were so successful, doing so well, and then you just dropped it all and took a one-way trip to Mexico because you weren't happy." I mean, at that point, yeah, that's what I thought was the only thing I could do for myself, because why continue doing it if it didn't have any meaning behind it? So I took a one-way trip to Mexico. I had no idea what I was going to do. I started off in Tulum, which was even more hedonistic and insane in all of its levels. And even though beer was cheaper than water at that point in Mexico, everyone was partying, everyone was outside. I felt I felt even more alone. And so from there, I actually took my first solo trip within Mexico to Mazunte, which is a little island beach town in Oaxaca. And I took a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I've never done anything with meditation, maybe 5, 10 minute meditations on Spotify, like nothing in person, nothing for the whole day, let alone a whole 10 days. And we were being fed a fully vegan meal for 3 times a day. We were meditating nonstop. We weren't able to speak to anyone. We weren't able to look at anyone. There were no mirrors on site. So it was really interesting to notice how much I wanted people to acknowledge me, when before I would walk down the street and had my head down and hope that no one would lock eyes with me. All of a sudden, that was something I was craving. And the the essence of that experience, I realized, was just letting go of a lot of what I was holding on to before, of that identity that I was holding on to before. And does it even matter? And what is this identity that I've created? Is it for me? Is it for others? What does that actually mean? And once I came out of that meditation experience, I just no longer had a desire to drink. I really wanted to be more conscious, more connected. At the same time, I also gave up meat and dairy, and slowly just other products that didn't actually matter to me anymore. So it was interesting how both of those things came at the same time. I think being plant-based as well as being sober come at the general thought of just being more conscious, more healthy, more alive in your body. So so that brought me to stay in Oaxaca, ended up in Oaxaca City, and that was really jarring, coming from a remote island, beach town, not a lot of people, to suddenly people working, going to taking buses, taking taxis, going around, going on tours, and then all the mezcal everywhere. And I thought, well, if I want to continue not drinking and I want to go back into society, I want to go back into bars and cafes and talk to people and be out of silence, what am I going to do? I thought, let's make a non-alcoholic mezcal. And I went back to Toronto. I started working with other non-alcoholic brands, opening up non-alcoholic menus, doing consulting, and I realized that there was a huge lack in the non-alcoholic agave space. The non-alcoholic tequilas and agaves weren't even made with agave. They weren't made in Mexico. There was just no culture connected to it. It was just any type of alternative, which is great as a jumping point. But I thought, well, I want to stay in Oaxaca. I want to live there. I want to work there. I want to create something. So, and again, just speaking on my last business, I really want this to matter to me. I want this to be meaningful. I want it there to be some substance. So I went back and I thought, okay, this time I'll make sure at least it's going to be made in Mexico and at least made with real agave and at least handcrafted all naturally so that there's something there that's a little bit more complex than just creating something out of nowhere.
That's amazing. I want to jump back a little bit because, I want to commend you on your ability to kind of carve space and, take a first step with intention in a lot of these areas. Because what really stands out to me is that, parts of these decisions were made in like the global pandemic era. And, as you were speaking, I was immediately taking myself back to those like Instagram happy hours that I was a part of. Like I too was
Exactly.
educating on that. I was also like, just playing pretend that we're doing this. And for some folks, I think that was a difficult arena to be in because it made it a lot easier to just kind of like go in the other direction. Happy hour was much extended. Like it started way earlier, it went way later. For some, it kind of seemed like it was the only thing that they were able to do with that time until it stretched like well beyond. Um, how do you feel looking back to that, knowing that in one of like the most difficult times you were able to kind of like step with intention and really kind of like take that inventory of yourself? Because when I think about my own story, like there wasn't a standout moment that happened that made me kind of like readdress my relationship with alcohol. It was the fact that I took a month off. And for whatever reason, one of those like when you're ready to hear the scripture, like the story will be told sort of thing, where at the end of that month, I was like, wow, I actually feel good. And this is something that I'm going to continue. Like, do you commend yourself for making that decision with intention at a time that could have been of most difficulty?
Absolutely. I mean, the pandemic was different for everybody, but I believe that the pandemic saved my life in essence.
Yeah.
By creating this moment where you're kind of at 2 roads. There's 2 roads that you can take. You can choose one to do better, you can choose one to just go all in to the worst case scenario because literally there was no tomorrow. We had no idea what was that gonna be, so it's like, "Okay, if there's no tomorrow, then I don't care. I'm just gonna go full in hedonistic. I'll just do everything else and who cares? Because there's no tomorrow. Or there is no tomorrow, so I might as well do better and leave the world at a better place." So I think I just didn't wanna cause more trouble. I was seeing so much pain, so much struggle, so much unhappiness that I didn't wanna be someone to contribute to that.
Hmm.
So I think it was more just me not adding more trouble and more problems than what already existed. And then I think my actual journey of sobriety came into to being in Oaxaca after the meditation experience when I was like, "Okay, I don't wanna drink anymore. I wanna be a little bit more health conscious." I was still hiding from the world. I was still afraid of what would a sober version of me look like. So I was really focused on just not drinking, not being in drinking spaces, and in essence, kind of cutting myself out of happiness as well. Because at least if I was cutting myself out of places where I might be convinced to do something, I could just be like, "Oh, I just won't show up to these locations, and then it'll never happen."
Yeah.
So, there was a little bit of avoidance there, a little bit of guard that I was holding up, and I think only in Oaxaca after I first joined AA there is when I realized that there was a community that I wanted to be a part of, not just being an individual that's just not drinking for the self-sufficiency of me being less worse than I could be.
Yeah. It sounds like you went inside, for a bit. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what that community helped to draw out? Was part of it in just seeing it in practice in others of what was possible and hearing stories, or was it just, kind of being placed within those stories and learning little bit more about yourself through, kind of like the vocabulary of others?
Yeah, I think I've always self-claimed myself to be super ambitious, super focused, super organized. Like I always know what my next step is going to be. And so if I decided, okay, my next step is I'm going to be sober, I went like full monk mode and I was like, okay, I'm vegan, I'm sober, I'm all of these things. And with such force and such conviction that no one would think that I was struggling or that I came from a place of struggle. And so when I finally went to AA and I remember telling my friends about this and they're like, "Oh, I just thought you just didn't like to drink. I didn't think that you ever had a problem with drinking, that you needed to go to a place to talk to other people that do drink because you were just so super focused doing yoga classes, doing meditation, doing all these things and you seem to be totally on the ball with everything." and I realized how much I was basically holding down this secret closet that was waiting to be opened and cleaned out, and I just kept it hidden there. And once I came out and I was like, "Yeah, actually, I wanna be around other alcoholics. I wanna talk to people that I can relate to," because here I am pretending to be someone that never really drank from the first place and just choosing to continue not drinking. That's a whole different space than someone that used to drink and is now not drinking. And I learned how to differentiate from those 2. I thought, "Oh, if I just hang out with a bunch of people that just never drank to begin with, I just stay in a safer place and then eventually I'll become them."
Mm,
Whereas actually I needed the opposite. I need to be around others that just drank a lot and have stories to share and can relate almost without even me saying. I can just bring up a few instances, a few stories, and they'll just automatically understand. And I never had that level of connectivity until I met with other alcoholics.
yeah. That's so interesting to hear you say that because there is like that's definitely something that I can relate with. It's almost like when you're a drinking person, you're kind of like telling some stories to yourself. You know, you're living a lie to some degree. Like it's not like for it's not always, like hiding bottles and stuff like that and being like the sneaky drinker or things like that. It's little stories that you tell to yourself as well to try to like keep your own narrative going. And it sounds like a little bit of that kind of like even slipped into the sober individual until you like were really able to understand like who was emerging from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize what the concept of a dry drunk was until I did join the community and understand that actually this is quite normal when someone is just white knuckling and just trying to do it all solo, and then you're just wrapped up in your own mind and convincing yourself and playing out this role until eventually this character is just too thin to sustain itself, and you're realizing, oh, all of these parts are cracking down.
Yeah. There's so much of that white knuckling though of like you want to be able to prove yourself that you're capable of making that change of like, in your head it's like it's that one thing to admit to myself that I need this help right now or I need to make this change. And then once you make the change and it's difficult, you're like, can I not even handle the success of, eliminating this thing from my life? It can be really terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely, and I realized how hardcore I was, the same way that someone wants to go on a hardcore diet
Mm.
or just re-identify themselves as something. I remember I was like, "I gotta go on my morning runs, I gotta go to my normal classes, and if anything goes wrong in that structure, my whole life explodes," and I'm like, "Why am I freaking out because I burned the toast? Like, this is gonna be a normal day," but for some reason, that just totally ruined everything for me, and I realized, wow, I need to figure out how to adapt to irregularity in life. And I think that's the switch from just like holding it down, not drinking, to living sober, and what does that look like, and choosing sobriety over and over every day.
Yeah. And who began to emerge from that? Like, what were some of the tiny gifts that you started to see that were able to show you that you're on the right path?
Well, I think coming up with this product was really a gift. I, at the beginning, was looking for a non-alcoholic mezcal. I was looking for an alternative, and there was a turning point when I was speaking to my scientist and I said, "Can you make an all-natural flavor of nail polish?" Because I wanted the flavor of alcohol. And he was like, "I could, probably with bananas," which I don't know how he connected that with bananas, but anyway, so he did that, and I said, "Okay, let's figure that out." And he said, "Well, I could do that for you, but it would just be a bad tasting non-alcoholic alcohol. Do you want that? Do you want your spirit to just taste like bad alcohol? Or do you want it to taste like a good spirit just without alcohol?" It's a different conversation. And I think that was my turning point to stop being like what I thought I wanted to be, stop copying what everyone else is already doing or anything like that, and just truly being who I am. And I think that was when I switched, "Okay, I'm not trying to be a non-alcoholic mezcal, I'm just gonna be a non-alcoholic agave spirit. We're just gonna do things totally new and totally separate from what exists today." And once I started truly embodying that and living sober, and I stopped judging and comparing and thinking, "Okay, none of these mezcaleros are gonna give me any respect. I'm not a man, I'm not Mexican, I'm not all of these things," and I kept focusing on what I'm not, and that I can't share mezcal with them, I can't do this with them, to, "You know what? That's fine. I'm just gonna go there and enjoy sober things. I'm gonna come in with my vegan brownies. I'm gonna come in different ways and talk to them and introduce them and create another community." And that's when other mezcaleros came to me and they were really impressed with what I was doing, and suddenly I was gaining respect and actually people wanting to drink less, coming to me and speaking to me, and I just realized just by living, just being just existing the way that I am today was actually the inspiration, not in me trying to hit a goal or be something that I actually wasn't.
Yeah, there's so much irony in trying to be authentic when the
Right?
authenticity is available.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you It's one thing to say, "I want to do this." How do you do it? How does somebody start making an agave-based non-alcoholic spirit?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of parts to it. I think the biggest part is agave and realizing I ended up learning a lot more about mezcal than I did before when I entered a world of making something without alcohol. It's funny, I had to learn so much about agave, but then also the supply chain, the availability of agave, who's roasting the agave, which regions can I get the agave from? And I'd say the hardest part out of all of this is there's a lot of gatekeeping against agave. So some specific providers just don't want to share their agave with you. And I thought, is this going to be a forever thing? Am I going to be challenged to finding agave on a regular basis? So I almost gave up just on that alone, and specifically using Tobala, which is a more rare premium type of agave that has less sugar. So very similar to how a lot of alcohol-free beers are being made today. They're using yeast and hops and other ingredients that already have less sugar so that there's no alcohol to begin with once it enters the still. It's the same way that we're doing that with non-alcoholic agave, just choosing agaves that already have less sugar to begin with. Um, on the plus side, I'm able to get 3 times the yield of liquid out of an agave like Tobala, whereas we'd only get a third of that in mezcal, and that's why mezcal is super premium, super expensive once they're making a Tobala. But now I'm able to make it a little bit more sustainable, more accessible, more available for other people to consume. So I just keep that in mind. I keep thinking, yes, this is hard. There's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of closed doors, but there's so many people that want this, so many people that are supporting this. And I thought the more that I go into this, the more I live it, the more I breathe it, the more people are going to see it and appreciate it and want it. And I just always have to keep that going in mind. And I've never had so much support in my life before. I've always been a go-getter, I've always been the one to carve my own road, but I always did that independently. This is the first time that I've really had lots of people backing me up, lots of people following me on for the ride.
Yeah, what does that support look like, and in what ways has it, found its way to you?
Um, just people in the industry raving about the product before they've even tried it, before they've met me. We had a Kickstarter that was incredibly successful. That only lasted 28 days, and I don't know how we hit our goal. We have people messaging us all the time that are saying like, "Oh, thank you for existing. You know, this is such a great product." We've traveled all around the US to demo the product. This has only been in existence for about a year now, and the oldest friends, new friends, random friends that I've met that have visited Oaxaca have opened their homes to us, for us to crash. I've never spent a penny on an Airbnb or a hotel in all of my travels, which has been insane to think about. So, all of the conventions that we go to, we've got mega discounts for because I just couldn't afford what they were, and organizers would give me heavy discounts, just to showcase and just to be there because so many people want us to be there. So so a lot of that, a lot of financial assistance, just general open doors, and we get investments, like, literally randomly. My partner's uncle would just be like, "Yeah, do you need money? We'll give you money." It was just at moments that I need it the most. I'm now learning that the universe gives back. Yeah.
How much of, how much parallel do you see in the support for the product versus you as the individual and your own journey? Do you kind of feel like these are things that are kind of like growing together in both in the same direction?
Absolutely. I think I need to be the one that's continuously to drive it, and also continuing to live authentically the way that I am and sharing as much as I am. Anytime that I go backwards and I think, oh, let me try to be something that I'm not, that's when I face the resistance all over again. And I get reminded, like, no, I don't need to do that. I just need to continue being myself and be honest that I'm not in a financially stable place. obviously, we're still a startup, and every time I say that, I'm received well. So instead of trying to up my status or pretend that I'm something else, I always just try to ground myself and make sure that I'm being fully transparent about where I am, what I'm doing, and that always gets received really well.
Nice. I'm lucky enough to have been to Mexico and, I've seen firsthand a lot of the kind of like small community drinking rituals and stuff like that. Mexico's no stranger to non-alcoholic drinks. Some of their like early ferments and stuff like that are phenomenal bases that, we see in some canned products here. And then also recipes are some really great things to make at home and, test your skills with fermentation or just furthering your development in the kitchen. Do you feel like TomoNoTomo as like a non-alcoholic, option kind of showed up as something new that was embraced culturally, or do you think it's something that sort of like folded right in with the community? Like, was there any sort of like rift to the acceptance of this, or how did you come to find it, drinking it with the locals?
Yeah, the hesitation existed primarily when I tried to call it a non-alcoholic mezcal, which I now learned there was so many regulation behind being a mezcal. A lot of local brands can't even call themselves a mezcal because they can't afford the registration for it.
Mm.
And to be a mezcal, the one of the minimum requirements is to be 35 to 55% alcohol. So there's no such thing as a non-alcoholic mezcal. So general terminology, learning all of that, and then respecting it and saying I'm a distilled agave spirit, just alcohol free, and this is how I'm distilling it, and being very transparent about that has gained a lot of respect in the community afterwards. And just like a lot of mezcaleros coming over and saying, wow, this is harder than regular mezcal. Like, gotta give it to you. And you guys are two girls just hammering away at agave in your garage and figuring it out. I mean, we don't have a large space, we don't have a huge labor force, right? And it's just us two, and we're learning along the way. None of us have any experience distilling. I just had this experience with what I know flavor wise from bartending and from tasting lots of agave spirits in my life. But this is a whole different ballgame in terms of production and quality assurance and approvals, imports, exports, like just a whole nother level of creating a very international brand. So yeah, after that, it's really changed the dynamic, and I'd say this year specifically, we've been getting a lot of accolades in Mexico City and Oaxaca. A lot of Michelin star restaurants are picking up the product, and Mexico is just like fully embracing the non-alcoholic scene now.
Yeah, and those are two, two hotspots for driving recommendation for new products and for, furthering technique and flavor profiles in cocktails. So that's really awesome to hear. In what ways are you seeing the product used that is exciting for you?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is really cool is in Oaxaca and in Mexico, when there are tons of mezcal tastings, they actually include TomoNoTomo as part of that mezcal tasting as an agave tasting, and they would present this as a tobola that has no alcohol. And showing that we're actually in the same vein as other spirits is really where I want to be ultimately. I don't want to have another category, to have a non alcoholic menu, to be on a second page, to be kind of isolated and separated from the existing menu. I want this to be all inclusive, that this is just spirit free, but still made out of the same tobola, made out of Oaxaca, where most agave spirits are categorized based on region and based on agave type. So we recently actually won the New York Spirit competition, gold. And this was the first time that they were actually accepting non alcoholic spirits. And they didn't categorize who was alcoholic and who was not alcoholic. And I've realized that we were the only non-alcoholic spirit that actually got won gold. So just to show that we're distilling in a way that is equal to the way spirits are being made. And actually the alcohol part is the cheapest part of making spirits. So it's kind of exciting to see how the world is changing, how the world is looking at how alcohol-free spirits can be made and the potential of craft and care that can come with it.
Yeah, I was hinting at that at the top of the show because I think that's something that really struck me as different is, um, you know, you exist as an individual to talk about the product. Sometimes you can only dig as deep as a label for some of these brands. The fact that you've mentioned Mexico and Oaxaca specifically as, a place to kind of like drop a pin on where this comes from. And then if it's you cutting up agave and distilling in your garage, like that's part of the process. And I think that's what really stands out to me in other bartenders with TomoNoTomo is, you know, bartenders are advocates for your brand if you give them something to believe in. They want to be able to share that story across the bar. And if your product has nothing to say other than you can make a margarita with this, then you can't really expect it to do numbers in some of these like great bars, and especially in areas like Oaxaca or Mexico City. Um, how have you been hearing bartenders talk about Tomo no Tomo? What are they saying?
I think it's quite varied still. There's still resistance to understanding spirits. Unfortunately, I think that comes with the legacy of other spirits beforehand that just didn't hit the mark because they were just alternatives. And I look at it the same way that plant-based products came in with the first Impossible Burger. They just wanted to copy a burger, and now we have so many different options and so many better options available where it's more transparent what's on the label. And so I think there's still some hesitation, maybe more on the bar owner, bar manager side of accepting um, non-alcoholic spirits because it didn't move in the past. Whereas I think newcomers, bartenders that are just seeing the demand and speaking directly to customers are saying, obviously, this is something that needs to be there. Whenever people ask for non-alcoholic spirits or something to do with agave specifically, bartenders instantly reach for the bottle, even if the bottle isn't available on menu yet. So that's been really cool to see. And it's been interesting. We'd actually get sales from new restaurants that came from a recommendation from another bartender from another restaurant that actually didn't pick up the products. So it's been great that it's been definitely loved and appreciated by bartenders, and we're just hoping that management ultimately comes to the table with that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly, the drive for these products is there. If you're anybody who follows the numbers, like they're not going in the opposite direction. Anybody who wants to call this like a fad or a trend is wrong. It's a movement, and you can actively see it in sales growth and stuff like that going in that direction. To kind of like follow up with that, what's next for you? Like, what are you doing to ensure that you're going to keep showing up in these spaces and keep telling your story in an authentic way?
Yeah, I I'm realizing that there was a lot of noise for non-alcoholic spaces, kind of dry spaces where there'd be coffee shop parties or sober parties. And now there's been a shift where people want the same party where drinking alcohol and drinking non-alcohol is fine, where there's blended spaces. So what I would love to see is going into spaces that are very heavy in agave with where all the agave nerds are and all they know is alcohol that goes along with these agave spaces, and then now showing the alcohol-free distillery that we have, how we're doing things a little bit differently, that people can come visit us, that we can be a part of that community. I think while I'm living in Mexico, I'm that bridge between the non-alcoholic spaces that exist primarily in the US and then very agave-centric spaces that exist in Oaxaca and Mexico, and now just trying to blend those two worlds together in a way that there doesn't need to be a differentiation on whether or not it's alcohol free. It's just well done spirits made with specific types of agave that everyone can celebrate together about.
It also looks great and sounds great. Can you talk to me a little bit about where the name came from and how you came to design the bottle?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I wasn't drinking in Oaxaca, and mezcal is literally served out in the street, regardless if there's a celebration or not, there's just mezcal everywhere, and I'd always have to say gracias, pero no tomo, which means I don't drink. And I originally was thinking of creating the product called No Tomo, but I didn't want to start with no. I didn't want to start with no or zero or non, which a lot of brands began with because I didn't want it to begin with a negative. I didn't want to say that we're missing something. So I put Tomo in front, which means I drink, I don't drink. So I kind of thought it as like the as a child when you're picking a flower and it's like he loves me not, he loves me, he loves me not. But then the same way with Tomo no Tomo. So I drink, I don't drink, and flip flopping between the two.
That's awesome. What about the design on the label? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so the design is actually a ceramic, hikara. It's kind of like, a traditional ceramic cup that's produced here in Oaxaca, and there's 2 faces on it, one that's the one that drinks and one that doesn't drink, and it was designed by, a graphic designer in Guadalajara who does a lot of, drink decor designs. So it was really great to have a local that had an understanding, especially in Jalisco. That's where he was working with a lot of tequila brands to make something modern, something new, but also brought in a little bit of fun and art into the design.
Very cool. I love that even that is tied to Mexico.
Yeah.
What's your favorite way to drink it?
My favorite way to drink it is actually neat. That's how it's
You don't
served.
hear a lot of people say that when they try.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people actually drink that neat here in Oaxaca specifically, and it's served as a tobala, just alcohol-free, and otherwise, I have it in a traditional paloma with grapefruit juice and Topo Chico.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amanda, what do you love about yourself?
It's really funny, I remember that was your last question. It's always your last question, and I was thinking, "How was I gonna answer that?" Because I think that a lot of people love about me is my ambition, my persistence, and I guess that's something I can also admire about myself. But what do I love about myself is probably my ability to change and my ability to forgive, which I didn't have before sobriety. So that I'm really grateful for, and I really love myself for developing that ability because it was something I didn't know I was capable of.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And having heard your story, it's even better to hear knowing that you have changed and forgave yourself in some arenas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Amanda, thanks so much for spending time with me, and thanks for creating something that fits so wonderfully into the bartending and non-alcoholic world.
Yeah, thank you so much.